A single mother went to a job interview to support her son, but the CEO saw something special in her that even he couldn't explain. Neither of them thought they would fall in love again, but fate changed their lives forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment where you are watching from. Dadaistim, the March rain in New York fell like a grey curtain over Fifth Avenue, turning the asphalt into dark mirrors that reflected the lights of the skyscrapers. Sarah Johnson ran along the wet sidewalk, her synthetic leather shoes making an uncomfortable noise with each hurried step. Her brown hair, which she had carefully styled in the early morning, now clung to her face like rebellious strands that betrayed her haste and desperation. "Oh my God, 20 minutes late!" she muttered under her breath, glancing at the cheap digital watch on her wrist. Her heart raced so fast she could feel it echoing in her ears, mingling with the sound of the relentless rain. Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't know if it was from the chill of the New York morning or the anxiety that had consumed her since she woke up. Johnson & Sons construction loomed before her like a monument of glass and steel, its 30 stories cutting through the cloudy sky with intimidating elegance. Sarah paused at the revolving door, peering through the tinted glass at the marble lobby that seemed more expensive than the entire apartment where she lived with her son in Brooklyn. Impeccably dressed women circulated the space, their designer clothes violently contrasting with the social ensemble Sarah had bought at a discount store. A navy blue blazer that tried to disguise the inferior fabric, and a black skirt she had adjusted herself. "You can do it, Sarah," she whispered to herself, repeating the words she had rehearsed in the cracked mirror of her apartment bathroom. As she pushed through the revolving door, the intoxicating aroma of fine wood and expensive perfumes hit her like a subtle slap. The lobby was even more imposing from the inside. The Carrara marble floor reflected crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling, while abstract paintings by artists she didn't recognize adorned the walls in neutral and sophisticated tones. The sound of her footsteps echoed uncomfortably in the silent environment, where even conversations seemed to be conducted in respectful whispers. The receptionist, a blonde woman in her mid-20s with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, looked up as Sarah approached the polished mahogany desk. "Good morning," Sarah said, trying to control her breathlessness. "I'm Sarah Johnson. I have an interview scheduled for 9 o'clock for the cleaning assistant position." The receptionist consulted an elegant agenda, her eyebrows furrowing slightly. "You are late. The other candidates have been here for some time." "I know. I'm sorry. The bus broke down in Brooklyn and I had to—" "Please fill out these forms," the receptionist interrupted, handing her a clipboard with paperwork. "The waiting area is over there. The interviews have already started." Sarah followed the indicated direction, entering a room that looked like a scene from a home decor magazine. Beige leather sofas were arranged around a glass coffee table where architecture and business magazines were laid out with military precision. 6 women already occupied the seats, all impeccably dressed, with perfect makeup and hair that had clearly been styled by professionals. She sat in an empty armchair, immediately aware of how she stood out from the group. Her hands, although clean and well-groomed, showed the marks of years of hard work, small scars from when she worked in a packaging factory, discreet but present calluses, short and unpolished nails. The other candidates glanced at her sideways, and Sarah could feel their silent judgments. "First time in a company of this size?" asked a middle-aged woman sitting across from her. The voice carried a subtle irony that made Sarah shrink inwardly. "Not exactly," Sarah replied, forcing a smile. "I've worked in large places before." "Oh, how interesting. Where?" "Mall of America, in the cleaning and maintenance department." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt her face heat up, knowing she had committed some kind of social faux pas that she couldn't identify. She focused on filling out the forms, her careful handwriting contrasting with the tension she felt in her shoulders. It was then that something unexpected happened. The glass door to the office on the top floor swung open abruptly, and a tall man descended the marble stairs with determined steps. Sarah watched him in the reflection of the window. About 38 years old, dark hair with a hint of grey at the temples, a perfectly tailored grey suit that probably cost more than her 6-month salary. There was something in the way he moved, a mix of natural authority and contained restlessness, that made the entire atmosphere of the room change instantly. The other candidates straightened up automatically, smoothing their skirts and checking their hair. But the man's eyes did not stray from Sarah for a second. She could feel the weight of his gaze, even without looking directly at him. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the receptionist with a deep voice that carried authority without needing to be loud. "The lady in the blue blazer, please." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. All heads turned to her, and the silence that settled felt like it weighed tons. "Me, sir," she managed to whisper, finally raising her eyes to meet his. "Yes, please follow me." She stood up with trembling legs, aware that she was breaking some invisible protocol. The sound of her shoes on the marble seemed amplified 1,000 times as she walked toward the elevator, feeling the other candidate's stares burning into her back. In the elevator, the silence was almost tangible. Sarah fixed her eyes on the changing numbers on the panel, feeling the imposing presence of a man beside her. He smelled of a subtle yet expensive perfume, something woody that mingled with the faint aroma of coffee and important papers. "Michael Johnson," he said suddenly, extending his hand, "CEO of the company." "Sarah Johnson," she replied, her small hand getting lost in his firm grip. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Johnson." "The pleasure is mine, Miss Johnson." The elevator doors opened on the 30th floor, revealing a corridor of intimidating elegance. Original artworks adorned the walls, and the polished hardwood floor reflected the soft light streaming through the panoramic windows. Sarah had never been this high in New York, and the view of the city stretched infinitely beyond the glass, like a sea of concrete and dreams. Michael's office was a subtle demonstration of power and good taste. Bookshelves filled with architecture and management books occupied an entire wall, while a solid mahogany desk dominated the center of the room. Behind it, a massive window offered a privileged view of the city, where the rain had just begun to clear, leaving the building shining under the first rays of sunlight. "Please, have a seat," he said, indicating a leather armchair in front of the desk. Sarah complied, trying not to show how impressed she was with the surroundings. Her hands carefully positioned themselves on her lap, a pose she had learned by observing others in formal situations. "I know you must be wondering why I called you first," Michael began, sitting down behind the desk. She discovered that his eyes were a deep brown that seemed to see beyond appearances. "The truth is, something caught my attention when I saw you arriving. I hope it wasn't something negative, sir." "On the contrary." He leaned slightly forward, as if to share a secret. "I saw a woman who ran in the rain, arrived late but still didn't give up. I saw someone who cares enough about an opportunity to persist, even when everything seems to be against her." Sarah felt a strange emotion forming in her chest, something between gratitude and distrust. She was used to people judging her by appearances, not by her determination. "Mr. Johnson, I need to be honest with you," she said, finding a courage she didn't know she possessed. "I really need this job. I have an 8-year-old son, and things haven't been easy lately. Can you tell me what happened?" And then, to her own surprise, Sarah found herself sharing. She spoke about the job at the mall, about the unfair theft accusations, about sleepless nights searching for work while Ethan slept in the next room. She talked about the humiliation of being escorted out of the mall by security, about the pitying looks from former colleagues, about the constant fear of not being able to pay the rent. Michael listened in silence, his eyes never leaving her face. When Sarah finished, there were unshed tears shining in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. "And yet, you came here today." he said softly. "I have no choice, Mr. Johnson. Giving up is not an option when you have a child depending on you." Something changed in his expression at that moment. An understanding, perhaps, a silent admiration that he tried to disguise by rearranging the papers on his desk. "The position is for night cleaning," he finally said. "The hours are from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Monday to Friday. The salary is $1,200, plus transportation allowance and a meal voucher." "I accept," Sarah said immediately. "You didn't even let me finish," he laughed, and it was the first time she saw something beyond formality in his expression. "There's also health insurance after 3 months of experience and a meal voucher for a midnight snack." "Thank you," she whispered, and this time the tears truly threatened to fall. "You have no idea how much this means to me." "I think I do," Michael said, standing up and extending his hand again. "Welcome to Johnson & Sons Construction, Sarah Johnson." Dee, when she left the building 20 minutes later, with the signed contract in her bag and her heart beating to a completely new rhythm, Sarah didn't know she had just taken the first step on a journey that would change her life forever. The rain had completely stopped, and the morning sun made the glass of the building shine like promises of a different future. The alarm clock rang at 8 p.m. sharp, cutting through the silence of the small apartment in Brooklyn like a sharp blade. Sarah quickly turned off the device, fearing waking Ethan, who had finally fallen asleep after 2 hours of math homework. The boy was growing so fast that he seemed to absorb knowledge like a sponge, but numbers still posed a challenge that required all the patience she could muster after a full day of searching for extra work. "Mum?" Ethan's sleepy voice echoed from the tiny room they shared. The single bed pushed against the wall and the mattress on the floor created an arrangement they had affectionately dubbed permanent camping. "It's just me getting ready for the new job, sweetheart. Go back to sleep," Sarah whispered, putting on the white sneakers she had bought on sale on 34th Street. The soles still had that characteristic smell of new rubber, but she knew they wouldn't last long on the rough surfaces she would have to face. She grabbed the navy blue backpack where she had organized her belongings, a spare shirt, a thermos with coffee made from the cheapest supermarket brand, some bologna sandwiches, and a notebook where she wrote down her monthly goals. On the first page, she had neatly written, "Goal: provide a better life for Ethan. Deadline: as soon as possible." The bus ride to Fifth Avenue took exactly 52 minutes, including waiting time and 2 transfers. Sarah had timed everything over the last 3 days, testing different routes to find the most economical option. Sitting on the hard plastic bench, she watched through the foggy window as the city transformed as they left the West Side. The working-class neighborhoods with their houses packed closely together gradually gave way to the elegant buildings and wide avenues of the financial district. At 2140, she was at the door of Johnson & Sons Construction, where a sleepy security guard greeted her with a mix of surprise and approval. "First night?" asked the man, an older black gentleman of about 60, with graying hair and a genuine smile. "I'm John. I've worked here for 15 years. You must be Sarah." "That's right. Nice to meet you, Mr. John." "The pleasure is mine, young lady. Just call me John. Here among us, during the night, there's no need for all that formality. Come, I'll show you where everything is." John guided her through the empty corridors that buzzed with activity during the day, but now seemed like a silent maze of possibilities. The echo of their footsteps mingled with the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant roar of traffic on Fifth Avenue, which never truly slept. "The cleaning supplies are here," he said, opening a metal cabinet in the basement. Vacuum, brooms, cloths, products, all neatly organized and labeled. Ms. Helen, who worked here before, was very organized. Poor thing had to retire due to health issues. Sarah absorbed every piece of information as if it was study material for an important exam. She memorized the location of each product, how Helen had organized the cleaning schedules for each floor, the peculiarities of each bathroom and room. One important tip: John said, lowering his voice as if revealing a state secret. "Dr. Richard always stays very late. Don't be alarmed if you see light in his office up there. The man practically lives here since he took over the company." "Has he always been like this?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual as she adjusted the apron she had brought from home. No. This started after his father passed away about 3 years ago. Old Dr. Anthony was a hard worker but knew when to go home. Richard, I don't know, it seems like he carries the world on his shoulders." Sarah started on the ground floor, meticulously vacuuming every inch of the marble lobby. The sound of the motor broke the silence of the night, creating a repetitive soundtrack that soon became hypnotic. There was something meditative about the work. Each calculated movement, every surface that gained shine under her hands, represented a small victory, a tangible proof of her effort. At 2 in the morning, when she reached the 15th floor, she decided to take a break for a snack. The pantry on the floor was small but functional, with a refrigerator, microwave, and an Italian coffee maker that seemed too expensive for an ordinary workplace. Sarah prepared her coffee with the grounds she had brought, but the machine turned even that simple ingredient into an aromatic and comforting drink. That's when she heard the footsteps. They weren't the heavy and familiar steps of John making his security rounds. They were firm, decisive steps from someone who knew every corridor of that building as if it were their own home. Sarah felt her heart race, fearing she was doing something wrong, intruding into a space where she shouldn't be. Richard Johnson appeared at the pantry door like an elegant apparition in the mundane setting. Even at 2 in the morning, his white dress shirt was immaculate, only the top buttons undone in concession to the fatigue of the night. His hair, which during the day remained perfectly styled, now showed signs of having been run through with hands several times, creating a slightly disheveled look that made him more human, more approachable. "Good evening," he said, and his voice carried a fatigue he tried to disguise. "Sorry if I startled you." "Good evening, Mr. Richard," Sarah replied, automatically rising from the small table where she had been sitting. "I can leave if you want to use the pantry." "No, please continue with your snack." He gestured for her to sit back down. "Can I just grab a coffee? I promise not to disturb." "Of course. Help yourself." Sarah discreetly watched as he handled the coffee maker with movements that revealed familiarity. His hands were elegant yet practical, someone who, despite his high position, wasn't afraid to do things for himself. When he turned with the steaming cup, their eyes met for a moment, and she saw something she didn't expect: loneliness. "The coffee has a different aroma," he commented after the first sip. "Better." "Oh, I brought my grounds from home. I hope that's not a problem." "Problem? On the contrary. The coffee here has been terrible for weeks. I think no one knew how to use the Italian machine properly." A comfortable silence settled, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant noises of the city that never fully slept. Sarah returned to eating her bologna sandwich, while Richard leaned against the counter, lost in thoughts that seemed too heavy for the night. "Can I ask you something?" she suddenly said, surprised by her own courage. "Do you always work this late?" Richard chuckled softly, a sound lacking much humor. "Lately, yes. Chronic insomnia. The doctors say it's stress, prescribed medication, but—" He shrugged. "Sometimes it's easier to stay here, working on productive things, than at home staring at the ceiling." "I understand," Sarah said, and there was a sincerity in her voice that made him look at her with more attention. "I also spend many sleepless nights, but in my case it's worry, bills, work, my son." "How is it for him? You working at night?" The question caught her off guard. It was rare for someone in a position of authority to show genuine interest in the personal aspects of her life. "It's been difficult," she admitted. "Ethan is very independent for his age, but still a child. He pretends that everything is fine, but I know he misses me. Yesterday morning when I got home, I found him sleeping in the living room, hugging my pajamas." Richard fell silent for a moment, processing the information. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, softer. "How old is he?" 8 years old. He's a smart boy, you know. He loves math, although he still struggles. And he draws really well. He keeps making portraits of the neighbors and selling them for $2 each to buy candy. "An entrepreneur from an early age," Richard commented, and there was a genuine smile in his voice. "Yeah, he has that knack. He says that when he grows up, he will have a big company to give jobs to all the single mothers in the world. He seems to have an exceptional mother." Marina felt her face heat up with the unexpected compliment. She wasn't used to kindness from people like Richard Johnson, and she didn't quite know how to react. "I'm just doing what any mother would do," she murmured. "No, Marina," he said, using her name for the first time since the interview. "Not every mother would run in the rain for a job opportunity. Not every mother would work all night to give her child a better life. You're doing something extraordinary, even if you don't realize it." The silence that followed was laden with meanings that neither was ready to name. Marina finished her sandwich in small bites, aware that she was living a moment that would be etched in her memory forever. The first time someone recognized her effort, not with pity, but with genuine respect. "I need to get back to work," she finally said, standing up and organizing her belongings. "Of course. And Marina." "Yes? Thank you for the coffee. I haven't had such a good one in a long time." When she left the break room, Richard stayed there for a few more minutes, looking out the window at the sleeping city. There was something in the silent determination of that woman that intrigued him, a strength he recognized but rarely found in people from his social circle. As he went up to his office, he realized that for the first time in months, he didn't feel the usual weight of loneliness pressing down on his shoulders. Marina finished cleaning the remaining floors with renewed energy. At 5:30 in the morning, when she prepared the last coffee before her departure, she left a clean cup next to the coffee maker, along with a small note written in her careful handwriting. "For Dr. Richard, fresh coffee to start the day, Marina." When Richard came down at 6:15 to get his first morning coffee, he found the message and smiled for the first time in weeks. He tucked the note into his desk drawer, not quite understanding why. The third month of work had established a comforting routine in Marina's life. She woke up at 7 in the morning, made breakfast coffee for Ethan, dropped him off at school, napped for a few hours in the afternoon, and by 9 p.m. was already on her way to Fifth Avenue. The casual encounters with Richard in the break room at 2 in the morning had become a silent tradition. She always left fresh coffee prepared, and he always showed up with some plausible excuse for a conversation that lasted exactly 15 minutes before they both returned to their responsibilities. In those late-night conversations, Marina had discovered unexpected facets of the CEO of New York's most prestigious company. Richard was not just the cold and calculating heir that the specialized media portrayed. He spoke passionately about affordable housing projects that the company was discreetly developing, demonstrated surprising knowledge about classical Brazilian music, and had a photographic memory for architectural details that made his stories about famous buildings absolutely fascinating. In turn, he had learned that Marina possessed impressive practical intelligence. She could memorize complex blueprints just by looking at them once, had well-founded opinions on energy efficiency in commercial buildings, and hummed sambas while she worked, something that, he confessed in one of their conversations, had become the soundtrack of his sleepless nights. It was a rainy Thursday in June when everything changed. Marina was cleaning the bathroom on the 18th floor when her phone rang. It was 6:20 in the morning, the time when Ethan should be having breakfast and getting ready for school. Her heart raced immediately. Ethan never called so early unless something was very wrong. "Mom?" The boy's voice sounded weak and distant, as if he were speaking through a tunnel. "Ethan, what's wrong, sweetheart?" I can't get up properly. Everything is spinning, and I can't stop coughing." Marina dropped the cleaning cloth on the floor, her hands trembling as she held the phone. "Do you have a fever?" "I think so. It's really hot here, but I'm cold." Ethan, listen carefully to what Mommy is going to say. You're going to cover yourself with the thickest blanket you have. Drink the water that's in the bottle next to your bed, and I'm on my way home, okay? Mom, you're going to be late for work. Forget about work, Ethan. You are more important than any job in the world. Marina hung up the phone and ran to the elevator as if she were escaping from a fire. Her hands shook so much that she could barely press the button for the ground floor. In the lobby, she found John finishing his morning rounds. Marina? What happened? You look pale as a ghost. John, my son is sick. I need to go home now, but I can't leave the job half done. Girl, go take care of your boy. I'll find a way to finish what's left. Don't worry about that right now. Thank you, Marina managed to whisper before running out to the bus stop. The trip back home was the longest journey of her life. Every red traffic light seemed to last an eternity. The bus stop, made her grit her teeth in anxiety. Through the fogged window, she watched New York waking up for another workday, millions of people following their routines while her personal world threatened to collapse. When she arrived at the apartment, she found Ethan curled up in bed, trembling under 3 blankets. His skin was pale, with red spots on his cheeks, indicating a high fever. His breathing was labored, and he coughed in a dry, painful way that made Sarah feel as if each cough was a punch to her stomach. "My love," she whispered, placing her hand on his forehead. The temperature was alarming. "We need to see a doctor right now." "Mom, we don't have money for a private doctor, and the clinic will take hours." "It doesn't matter. We're going to the emergency room at St. Luke's Hospital. It's private, but in emergencies, they can't refuse care." Ethan tried to protest, but he didn't have the strength. Sarah wrapped him in blankets, called a taxi, and spent the last $40 she had to get to the hospital. During the ride, she held her son's small, warm hand, whispering prayers she hadn't said since childhood. The private emergency room was a different world from the public hospitals she knew. Everything was clean, organized, efficient. But when they reached the reception, the financial reality hit her like a bucket of cold water. "It will be $300 just for the emergency consultation," the receptionist informed, a middle-aged woman looking at Ethan wrapped in blankets with a mix of pity and impatience. "Tests and medications are extra." Sarah felt the world spin. $300 was almost a quarter of her monthly salary. "Please," she pleaded, "my son is very sick. I work. I can pay in installments, do anything." "Unfortunately, our policy—" "What's the problem here?" Richard's voice cut through the conversation like a sharp blade. Sarah turned, incredulous, to find him walking toward the reception desk with determined steps. Even at 7:30 in the morning, he wore a sharp suit and carried an authority that made the entire emergency room seem to slow down. "Dr. Johnson," the receptionist immediately changed her tone, "I didn't know you were here." "I am now," he said dryly, before turning to Sarah. "Is this Ethan?" Sarah could only nod, still in shock to see him there. Richard knelt down to the boy's level, who looked at him with feverish but curious eyes. "Hey, champ, I'm Richard, a friend of your mom's. We're going to take care of you, okay? Dr. Smith is available for immediate consultation in room 3. The receptionist suddenly demonstrated impressive efficiency. "All expenses will be charged to the corporate account of Johnson & Sons Construction." "Great, and I want you to call Dr. Mendoza as well. He's the best pediatric pulmonologist in New York." "Mr. Richard," Sarah managed to whisper, "I can't accept this." It's not a matter of accepting or not accepting," he said, helping her take Ethan to the office. "It's about doing what's right." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of tests, doctors speaking in technical terms that Sarah desperately tried to understand, and Ethan undergoing a battery of tests that confirmed the diagnosis: early-stage bacterial pneumonia, which could have become severe if not treated quickly. "He's going to be fine," said Dr. Smith, a kind man with grey hair. We're going to start treatment with antibiotics today. It's important that he takes the medication exactly as prescribed and rests a lot for the next 10 days. 10 days? Sarah repeated, feeling her stomach sink. Doctor, I work at night. I can't leave him alone for 10 days. Mom. Ethan held her hand with surprising strength. I'll be fine alone. You need to work. Absolutely not, Richard said firmly. Sarah, you will stay home taking care of Ethan for as long as necessary. Your salary will be maintained as usual. Mr. Richard, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. It's company policy to take care of our employees and their families. Sarah knew that no company policy covered full salary for absences due to children's illness, especially for a newly hired employee. But something in Richard's expression stopped her from questioning it out loud. When they left the hospital, Ethan already felt better after the first cycle of intravenous medication. Richard insisted on driving them home in his black BMW, which seemed more expensive than the entire apartment they lived in. During the ride, Ethan, still drowsy from the medication, asked a question that left both adults in silence. Mom, is Uncle Richard your boyfriend? Ethan! Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment. No, champ, Richard replied with a genuine smile in the rearview mirror. I'm just a friend of your mom who cares about you two. Oh, Ethan seemed to process the information. You seem nice. My mom deserves to have nice friends. When they stopped in front of the simple building where they lived, a 4-story walk-up with peeling paint and a creaky iron gate, Sarah felt a deep shame about the difference between their worlds. But Richard got out of the car and helped Ethan up the 3 flights of stairs as if it were the most natural thing in the world. In the small but impeccably clean apartment, he looked at Ethan's drawings stuck to the fridge, the makeshift bookshelf made of crates serving as a library, the kitchen table that also functioned as a desk for homework. You have a very cozy home, he said, and Sarah realized there was no condescension in his voice. Only sincerity. It's small, but it's ours, she replied, helping Ethan lie down in bed. The size of a home is measured by the love inside it, not by square footage. When Ethan fell asleep, they sat in the small living room drinking coffee from mismatched cups that Sarah had. She had found it on sale. Why did you do that? She finally asked. Why did you help us? Richard fell silent for a long moment, staring at the framed photo of Sarah and Ethan at the boys' kindergarten graduation, the only decoration she had been able to afford. Because, he finally said, sometimes we need someone to believe we deserve help, and you both deserve much more than life has offered you so far. When he left, promising to check on Ethan the next day, Sarah sat in the empty room, trying to process everything that had happened. For the first time since she had started working at Johnson & Sons Construction, she allowed herself to think the impossible, that maybe, just maybe, her life was truly starting to change. But as she watched Ethan sleeping peacefully, his breathing finally steady, a new worry began to form in her chest. Richard's kindness had come with a closeness that frightened her, not because it was inconvenient, but because it had awakened feelings in her that she had sworn never to let bloom again. And that, she knew, could complicate everything. 2 weeks had passed since Ethan's pneumonia episode, and Sarah felt as if she had woken up in a parallel version of her own life. The boy had fully recovered, returning to school with renewed energy and enthusiastic stories about Uncle Richard, who drove a car just like Batman's. But the changes in Sarah's work routine began subtly, almost imperceptibly, until they became impossible to ignore. First, there were the small details. When she returned to work after taking care of Ethan, she found a new Italian coffee machine in the break room on the 15th floor, accompanied by specialty beans that turned her night breaks into true aromatic rituals. An investment in employee productivity, Richard had explained when she tried to thank him, but his eyes carried a complicity that said much more. Then came the administrative changes. Ms. Helen Johnson, Richard's older sister and the HR director, had implemented a new professional development program that required all employees to attend monthly meetings during business hours. For Sarah, who worked overnight, this meant sacrificing her few hours of sleep or choosing between her job and the accounting technical course for which she had received a scholarship to attend in the evening. "It's absurd," John grumbled during one of his morning rounds. 15 years I've worked here, and I've never seen such a poorly thought-out policy. It's as if someone wants to deliberately harm those who work the night shift. Sarah knew that the changes were no coincidence. Ms. Helen Johnson was a 45-year-old woman, a law graduate from Harvard, with a reputation for relentless efficiency that barely concealed her disdain for employees she considered temporary. In the hallways, whispered comments suggested that she viewed Sarah's presence in the company as an indefinable threat to the established order. It was on a Tuesday, during one of the mandatory meetings held in the auditorium on the 20th floor, that Sarah fully understood the nature of the game being played. Sitting in one of the last rows, trying not to draw attention with her work attire amid the suits and formal dresses of the other employees, she watched Helen present the new Corporate Excellence Guidelines. Johnson & Sons Construction has always prided itself on maintaining the highest quality standards in all aspects of our operation, Helen said, her sharp voice echoing through the auditorium. This naturally includes the profile of our employees. We are implementing stricter quarterly evaluations, minimum educational requirements for certain positions, and a behavioral adjustment program. Helen's eyes met Sarah's in the audience, and there was a calculated glint in that gaze that made the temperature in the room seem to drop a few degrees. "We understand that changes can be challenging for some," Helen continued, never breaking her gaze from Sarah. "But we firmly believe that every employee must align with the values and expectations of our company. Those who cannot adapt to the new standards will, of course, be redirected to opportunities more appropriate to their qualifications." Sarah felt her face heat up, but she maintained a neutral expression. Around her, other employees whispered to each other, and she could feel some curious glances in her direction. It was clear that she was not the only one who understood the true target of that presentation. After the meeting, as she walked toward the elevator, a familiar voice called her. "Sarah, can you talk to me for a moment?" Richard was standing near the entrance of the auditorium, hands in the pockets of his grey suit, an expression that mixed irritation and concern. He gestured discreetly toward an empty meeting room, and she followed him, aware of the eyes that tracked her movement. "Are you okay?" he asked as soon as he closed the door. "I am," she replied, although her voice sounded tenser than usual. The meeting was enlightening. Richard ran his hands through his hair, messing up his perfect hairstyle in a gesture that Sarah had learned to recognize as a sign of frustration. "Sarah, I want you to know that these changes were not discussed with me before being implemented. Helen has autonomy in HR, but this—" He paused, searching for the right words. "This does not represent the company's philosophy." "Mr. Richard," Sarah said calmly, "may I ask a direct question?" "Of course. Am I being targeted for any specific reason, or is it just because I don't fit the profile that Dr. Helen considers suitable?" The direct question caught him off guard. Richard looked at her for a moment, as if assessing how much of the truth he could share. "Helen is protective of the company," he finally said. "Sometimes that makes her see threats where there are none." "And am I a threat?" "You are an exemplary employee who is being unjustly pressured." Sarah realized that he had avoided directly answering the question, and that told her everything she needed to know. There was something more going on here, something that had less to do with her professional performance and more with the family dynamics she was beginning to understand. "Can I be honest with you?" she asked. "Always. I need this job. I can't afford to get involved in internal conflicts at the company. If Ms. Helen wants me to leave, maybe it's better for me to go before things get worse." "No." The response came out quicker and more vehemently than Richard had intended. "I mean, you shouldn't have to leave because of misunderstandings. Let me talk to Helen. I'm sure we can find a solution." Sarah watched him carefully, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched unconsciously. There was something in the urgency of his response that made her realize the situation was more complicated than she had imagined. "Mr. Richard," she said softly, "you know people are talking, right? Talking about what? About us. About the fact that you called me first for the interview, about the hospital, about those conversations in the break room." Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't care about gossip, but I know it might be different for you." Richard was silent for a long moment, looking out the conference room window at the bustle of Fifth Avenue below. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, lower, more personal. "Sarah, can I tell you something I've never told anyone at the company?" She nodded. "When my father died, I was completely lost. I inherited this company at 25, unprepared, with no real experience. For the first few years, I operated on autopilot, making decisions based on what I thought he would do. But in the last few months—" He paused, as if revealing a dangerous secret. "In the last few months, I've started making decisions based on what I believe is right, and I believe you deserve to be here, even if that causes problems for you. Especially if it causes problems for me." The silence that followed was laden with meanings neither of them was ready to fully explore. Sarah felt as if she were at a crossroads, where each path led to different but equally challenging complications. "Mr. Richard," she finally said, "I will continue to do my job to the best of my ability, but if things become unsustainable, I will have to make the decision that is best for me and for Ethan." "I understand," he said, "and I hope that when the time comes to make that decision, you consider that not all risks are worth avoiding." When Sarah left the conference room and returned to work, she carried with her the certainty that her life had taken an irreversible turn. The coming weeks would determine not only her professional future, but also the kind of person she would choose to be when confronted with the possibility of something greater than she had dared to dream. That night, while cleaning the upper floors of the building, Sarah hummed Corcovado by Tom Jobim, a song her mother used to sing when she was a child. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wouldn't have to carry the weight of the world alone. But also, for the first time, she understood that dreaming could be the most dangerous part of this entire journey. The month of September arrived in New York with that subtle promise of spring the city carried in the air, even amidst the concrete and the incessant traffic. Sarah had found a delicate rhythm between the growing pressures at work and her responsibilities as a mother. Ethan, fully recovered from pneumonia, had developed an almost reverent admiration for Richard, constantly asking when the uncle with the nice car would come to visit them again. The changes implemented by Ms. Helen continued to create small daily obstacles. Mandatory meetings had become bi-weekly, always scheduled at times that interfered with Sarah's technical course. The new excellence standards included specific uniforms that cost nearly $200 each, a small fortune for someone earning $1,200 a month. But Sarah adapted, as she always did, sleeping less, saving more, finding creative solutions to problems that seemed designed specifically to discourage her. It was on a Monday, at 6 in the morning, when she was finishing cleaning the top floor, that John appeared with a worried expression etched on his wrinkled face. "Sarah, Dr. Richard wants to talk to you in his office before you leave." Her heart skipped a beat. Formal meetings in the office were different from casual conversations in the break room. They meant serious matters, important decisions, changes that could alter everything. "Did he say what it was about?" "No, dear. But it didn't seem to be anything bad. The man was even smiling, which is rare to see lately. Sarah quickly organized her cleaning supplies, checked her appearance in the bathroom mirror, and made her way to the 30th floor with her stomach churning with nerves. Richard's executive secretary, an elegant woman named Beatrice, greeted her with a professional smile. "Good morning, Sarah. Dr. Richard is waiting for you. You can go right in." The office was bathed in the golden light of dawn, streaming through the panoramic windows, creating an almost cinematic atmosphere. Richard was standing behind his desk, flipping through some documents, but turned immediately when she entered. "Good morning, Sarah. Thank you for coming before heading home." "Good morning, Mr. Richard. Is something wrong?" "Actually, yes," he said, and there was something different in his posture, a contained energy, as if he were holding back good news. "Please, have a seat." Sarah took the leather armchair in front of the desk, her hands automatically adjusting in her lap in a posture she had learned to adopt in formal situations. "Sarah," Richard began, sitting down as well, "in recent months I've observed your work not just as a cleaning staff member, but as a person. Your dedication, your organizational skills, your practical intelligence." She remained silent, unsure of where the conversation was leading. "Last week, when you reorganized the files on the 18th floor that were in complete disarray after the legal department's move, it caught my attention. You created a cataloging system that our own managers couldn't implement. I just thought it would make sense to organize by date and type of document," Sarah said modestly. "Exactly. And when you suggested a change in the layout of the reception area to improve the flow of people, I realized you have a spatial and organizational vision that goes far beyond your current functions." Sarah felt her heart race, but tried to remain calm. "Are you saying—" "I'm offering you a promotion," Richard said, and his smile was genuine and warm. "Administrative assistant, Special Projects Department. Business hours, Monday to Friday, from 8 to 5. Starting salary of $2,400, plus full benefits." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet, leaving her floating in a reality that seemed too good to be true. "Mr. Richard, I haven't even finished high school," she managed to whisper. "You're taking the technical course. And more importantly, you have something that isn't taught in any college: intuition, dedication, and emotional intelligence. Those qualities are worth more than any diploma. But the other people in the company, they will think it's nepotism or—" "Sarah," Richard gently interrupted, "how many times in your life are you going to pass up an opportunity because you're worried about what others will think?" The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. Sarah realized she had spent her entire life downplaying her abilities, refusing to dream big, because dreams seemed like luxuries she couldn't afford. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course, but I have one condition." "What?" "I want your answer by the end of the day. Sometimes overthinking a decision is the same as deciding not to make any decision." When Sarah left Richard's office, she felt as if she were walking on a cloud. The promotion represented not just more money, but a complete change in perspective about her future. Business hours meant she could have dinner with Ethan every day, help him with his homework, attend school meetings. It meant stability, respect, the possibility of building a real career. But it also meant something more complicated: an inevitable closeness with Richard that would make it impossible to ignore the feelings that had been quietly growing between them. On the bus back home, she watched the city waking up for another day of work through the window. Busy executives walked along the sidewalks in their immaculate suits. Elegant women waited at bus stops, and uniformed children headed to school. For the first time, she could imagine herself as part of that world, not just as an observer. At home, she found Ethan having breakfast before school, cereal with milk in a bowl she had bought on sale, but he treated it as if it were fine china. "Mom, how was work today? You seem different." "Different? How?" "I don't know. Brighter." Like when you're really happy, not just pretending to be happy. The boy's observation surprised her. Ethan had always been perceptive beyond his years, but this ability to read her emotions sometimes left her speechless. Gabby, how would you feel if Mom changed jobs? For better or for worse? For better, much better. Ethan's eyes lit up. Did you get a new job? Are you going to make more money? Can we buy those expensive cookies from the supermarket? Sarah laughed, realizing how comfortingly simple a child's priorities were. Maybe, sweetheart, I'm still deciding. Mom, Ethan said, with a seriousness that contrasted with his 8 years, you always teach me that when life offers a good opportunity, we have to grab it. Why would it be different for you? Her son's innocent wisdom hit her like a revelation. All morning, while Ethan was at school and she tried to sleep, Sarah weighed the pros and cons of the decision. But deep down, she knew her choice had already been made the moment Richard made the offer. At 4 o'clock, she was back at Johnson & Sons Construction, wearing her best outfit, a business suit she had bought for interviews and had only worn 3 times. She went up to the 30th floor with her heart pounding, but with a determination she hadn't felt in years. "Mr. Richard," she said when Beatrice announced her, "I accept the promotion." The smile that lit up his face was more radiant than all the crystal chandeliers in the company lobby. "That's great. You start on Monday. Beatrice will give you all the details about the location of your desk, access to the systems, training schedule." "Mr. Richard," Sarah said, hesitating for just a moment, "can I ask a personal question?" "Of course. Why are you doing this for me?" Richard was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much of the truth he could share. "Because," he finally said, "sometimes we recognize special qualities in people, and sometimes, just sometimes, we have the opportunity to make a difference in the life of someone who deserves it. I'm not going to waste that opportunity." When Sarah left the building that afternoon, walking down Fifth Avenue with her head held high and a job contract in her bag, she felt that her life had officially turned a page. She didn't yet know all the challenges that awaited her, but for the first time in years, she was eager to find out. That night, she called her sister in Chicago to share the news. "Sarah, that's amazing, but are you sure you won't have any problems? A CEO offering a promotion like that, out of nowhere." "It's not out of nowhere, Claudia. I earned this opportunity." And as she spoke, Sarah realized she genuinely believed her own words. Perhaps that was the most important change of all. Sarah Johnson's first week as an administrative assistant felt like learning a completely new language. Sitting at a mahogany desk on the 22nd floor, in front of a computer that cost more than her previous monthly salary, she absorbed information about contracts, budget spreadsheets, and construction schedules with the determination of someone who knew she couldn't afford to fail. Her desk was in an open area known as the Special Projects Department, an elegant euphemism for the division that handled the company's social ventures, building schools in underserved neighborhoods, renovating health clinics, and subsidized housing. She discovered it was the part of the company that Richard was most proud of, yet it represented only 5% of Johnson & Sons Construction's profits. "Welcome to the dreamers sector," said Carla, a 30-year-old architect who became her informal mentor. "This is where they put those who believe that civil construction can be more than just maximum profit." Carla was a woman with curly hair always tied up in a messy bun, thick-rimmed glasses, and an endless collection of colorful blouses that contrasted with the sober corporate environment. She had studied at NYU, came from a middle-class family in Brooklyn, but chose to work on social projects out of personal conviction. "Sarah is our new assistant," Richard announced at a meeting on Monday morning. "She will help organize the housing contracts and monitor ongoing projects." The look Sarah received ranged from neutral curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. There were 12 people in the department, architects, engineers, administrators, all with university degrees, all speaking a technical language that she had to mentally translate with every conversation. "Where did you come from?" asked Paul, a 40-year-old civil engineer with a well-groomed grey beard. There was no malice in the question, just professional curiosity. "I worked in cleaning right here," Sarah replied calmly. At night, the silence that followed lasted exactly 5 seconds, long enough for her to feel the weight of all the gazes, but not too long to become awkward. "What a radical change," commented Fernanda, a blonde administrator who carried designer bags and always spoke in a slightly condescending tone. "It must be interesting, the adaptation." "It's been a learning experience," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. It was Carla who broke the tension. "Great. Sarah, come here and I'll show you how the project monitoring system works. It's organized chaos, but you'll get the hang of it quickly." In the following days, Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for deciphering the chaotic patterns of social projects. Where others saw confusing spreadsheets and delayed schedules, she saw logical connections and practical solutions. Her life experience, knowing exactly how much each item in a subsidized housing unit cost, understanding the real needs of those living in housing complexes, became a competitive advantage. "Sarah," Carla said on a Thursday, watching her completely reorganize the housing project contract file in East Side, "you have a perspective on things that none of us have. It's as if you understand what's behind the numbers." "It's because I've lived on the other side," Sarah explained. "I've lived in subsidized housing. I've experienced hardship. When I see a budget of $1,000 for a complete kitchen, I know exactly what can be bought with that money and what's missing." This unique perspective quickly caught attention. Sarah began to identify discrepancies in budgets that went unnoticed by everyone else. A contract for renovating a school in South Bronx included premium finishing materials that cost 3 times more than equally good alternatives. A housing project in Queens specified flooring that no one could keep clean without expensive cleaning products. "There's something wrong here," she said to Carla, pointing at a spreadsheet on the computer screen. "This supplier is charging $400 per square meter for ceramic tile. In the Bronx, you can buy the same tile for $120. But Sarah, you have to consider quality, the technical specifications." "Carla, I know that tile. My neighbor put the same one in her house. It's good quality, durable, easy to clean. The price difference isn't justified by the quality difference." That's when they began to uncover a troubling pattern. Several suppliers for the social projects were systematically inflating prices. Contracts that should cost $500,000 were reaching $800,000, always with seemingly solid technical justifications. "This needs to get to Dr. Richard," Carla said on a Friday, after Sarah had identified the 5th discrepancy of the week. "Do you think he doesn't know?" "I'm sure he doesn't. These contracts go through Ms. Helen's approval before they reach him, and she's always had, let's say, a more profit-focused vision for the company." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Ms. Helen Johnson was not just Richard's sister, she was a minority partner in the company, responsible for all administrative and financial decisions. If there were irregularities in the contracts, she was necessarily involved. "Carla, could this cause problems for us?" "For us, Sarah, if we're right, this could cause problems for everyone." That night, Sarah returned home, with her head buzzing with information and worries. Ethan immediately noticed something was different. "Mom, you seem worried. Is the new job not good?" "The job is great, sweetheart. It's just that sometimes we discover things we didn't expect to find." "Bad things?" Sarah looked at her son, 8 years old, curious eyes, and innocent confidence that she would always know what to do. How could she explain to a child that the adult world was full of complicated decisions, where doing the right thing sometimes meant risking everything one had achieved? "They're not bad things, Ethan. They're just complicated." Over the weekend, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the numbers she had seen. 5 social projects, all with the same pattern of overpricing. $500,000. Marina was acutely aware of the difference between the fair price and the charged price. Money that could build 2 more schools, renovate 3 more health clinics, and provide homes for 20 more families. On Monday morning, she made a decision that she knew could change everything. "Sarah, I need to speak with Dr. Richard. About the contracts. About the contracts." "Marina, are you sure? This could complicate things for you here." "If I don't speak up, it will complicate things for many people who need these projects." Sarah watched her for a long moment, as if seeing Marina for the first time. "You know you might be dealing with some powerful people, right?" "I know. And you're still going to do it?" "Sarah, I've spent my whole life being invisible, afraid of bothering people, of causing problems. Now I have a chance to make a real difference. I won't waste it out of fear." At 3 o'clock that Monday, Marina was in Richard's office with a folder full of spreadsheets and contracts that could completely change the course of her life at the company. "Marina, Beatrice said you wanted to show me something urgent about the social projects." "Mr. Richard," she said, taking a deep breath, "I think I've discovered something you need to know. And I must warn you, it might not be an easy conversation." Richard leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "I'm listening." And then Marina began to speak, knowing that each word took her further away from the safe world she had just conquered, but also closer to the person she had chosen to become. The silence in Richard's office grew heavier with each spreadsheet Marina presented. He studied the numbers with intense concentration, the muscles in his jaw tightening imperceptibly as the evidence piled up on his mahogany desk. The afternoon sun streamed through the panoramic windows, creating patterns of light and shadow that seemed to symbolize the duality of what was being revealed. "This contract here," Marina pointed to a specific sheet, her voice gaining confidence with each explanation, "is for the construction of a daycare in East Side. The approved budget was $900,000, but look at this." She slid another spreadsheet across the desk. "I got an informal quote from the same suppliers. The actual cost would be $550,000, including a reasonable profit margin." Richard picked up the calculator, checking the figures with mechanical movements. $350,000 in difference for a single project. "Marina, are you sure about these numbers?" "Absolutely. I spent the entire weekend double-checking, reconfirming, looking for alternative explanations." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Mr. Richard, it's not just this project, it's a pattern. All the social projects approved in the last 18 months follow the same logic of overpricing." "Are you suggesting that—" "I'm suggesting that someone is siphoning off money intended for social projects. And from what I've been able to trace, all these approvals go through Ms. Helen before they reach you." The change in Richard's expression was almost imperceptible, but Marina caught it. A shadow of pain crossed his eyes for a fraction of a second before being replaced by something harder, more determined. "Marina, do you understand the gravity of what you're telling me?" "I do, sir. I'm accusing your sister of corruption." "No," Richard said firmly. "You're presenting evidence of financial irregularities. It's different." Marina observed him carefully, realizing the subtle but important distinction. Richard was being cautious, thinking as a businessman, as a brother, as the heir to a family empire that could crumble if the accusations were confirmed. "Mr. Richard, may I ask a personal question?" "Of course. Did you suspect anything?" Richard was silent for a long moment, gazing out at the city view through the window. When he spoke, his voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. "In the last 2 years, Helen has been pushing hard for us to sell the Social Projects division. She says it's a bad investment, draining resources from the company without adequate return." He paused. I always resisted because I believe it's our social responsibility, but now you understand why she wanted to sell. If she was siphoning off resources, making the division disappear would eliminate the evidence. Marina nodded, feeling the weight of the revelation. Mr. Richard, what are you going to do? First, I will need a complete audit, but this has to be done very carefully. If Helen is really involved, she will try to destroy evidence as soon as she knows we are investigating. And in the meantime, you continue working normally, but Marina, he leaned forward, his gaze intense. This needs to stay between us for now. You cannot talk to anyone in the department, not even Sarah. I understand. And there's one more thing. Richard hesitated before continuing. Helen cannot suspect that you discovered anything. If she thinks you are a threat. The implication hung in the air. Marina felt a chill, realizing she had put herself in a potentially dangerous position. Mr. Richard, can I be honest about something? Always. I knew that discovering this could cost me my job, but I can't pretend I didn't see it. These are resources that should be building schools, daycares, affordable housing. It's money that should be reaching people like me, like my family. Richard looked at her with an expression that mixed admiration and concern. You understand that this goes beyond losing your job, right? Helen is an experienced lawyer with connections. If she feels threatened, she might try to harm me in other ways. Exactly. Marina fell silent, processing the implications. She was at a crossroads where there were no completely safe options. Ignoring what she had discovered would be a betrayal of her own values. Moving forward meant entering a war that could destroy not only her career, but potentially her life. Mr. Richard, she finally said, can I tell you a story? He nodded. When Ethan was 4 years old, we were in line at the health clinic. It was 5 in the morning because he had been running a fever for 3 days. In front of us, there was a woman with a baby who was crying non-stop. She was desperate, saying she didn't have money for a private doctor and that the clinic only had a pediatrician twice a week. Sarah paused, the memories bringing a controlled emotion to her voice. I kept thinking, somewhere, someone is deciding how much money goes to public health, how many doctors will work at each clinic, how many children will be treated. And that person has probably never spent a night in line at a public hospital. And what does that have to do with our situation? It has to do with the fact that I can't pretend I don't know where the money that should be taking care of those children is, even if it costs me dearly. Richard watched her for a long moment, as if he were seeing a version of her he had never known before. Sarah, you know I can't fully protect you in this situation, right? Ms. Helen has power in the company. She has lawyers. She has... I know. But can you promise me one thing? What? If things get bad for me, you keep investigating. Don't let this discovery die just because I might have problems. Sarah, promise me. Richard extended his hand across the table. I promise. The handshake was firm, sealing an agreement that both knew could cost much more than they imagined. Now, Richard said, returning to business mode, I need you to keep collecting evidence, but very discreetly. Can you do that? I can. And Sarah, from now on, our conversations about this matter can only happen here, in this office, with the door closed. Anywhere else, we continue to be just boss and employee. Understood. When Sarah left Richard's office that afternoon, she carried the weight of a secret that could change not only her life, but the fate of hundreds of families who depended on the company's social projects. As she walked through the elegant corridors of Johnson & Sons Construction, she observed everything with different eyes. The artwork on the walls, the designer furniture, the well-dressed employees. All of it had been built with money that could be making a real difference in the lives of people who truly needed it. That night during dinner with Ethan, the boy noticed her distraction. Mom, you're acting strange today. Strange how? I don't know. Like when you're worried, but trying to pretend you're not. Her son's perception surprised her again. Ethan was growing up, developing an emotional sensitivity that sometimes left her speechless. Sometimes, Ethan, our lives change in ways we didn't expect, and then we have to decide what kind of person we want to be. And have you decided? Sarah looked at her son. 8 years old, curious eyes, absolute confidence that she would always make the right choice. I think so, sweetheart. I think so. But as she helped Ethan with his homework that night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking that she had just taken the first step on a journey that could lead them to places she couldn't even imagine. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah discovered the irregularities in the contracts, and the tension on the 22nd floor was almost palpable. She continued her discreet investigation, collecting evidence with the meticulousness of a detective while maintaining the facade of a dedicated employee, merely fulfilling her administrative tasks. With each document analyzed, with each spreadsheet checked, the pattern of overpricing became clearer and more extensive. Ms. Helen Johnson had increased her presence in the Special Projects Department, showing up unannounced for routine inspections that left all the employees on high alert. Sarah felt the woman's penetrating gaze on her during these visits, as if Ms. Helen could smell that something had changed, even without knowing exactly what. Sarah is adapting well to her new role, Ms. Helen had commented during one of these visits, addressing Carla but looking directly at Sarah. It's impressive how determined people can reinvent themselves when given opportunities. The seemingly complimentary tone carried a subtle threat that did not go unnoticed by anyone in the room. It was on a Thursday in October, during a particularly busy morning, that Sarah was called for something completely unexpected. A meeting with Japanese investors who were considering a multi-million-dollar partnership with Johnson & Sons Construction for a sustainable housing project. Sarah, Beatrice said over the intercom, Dr. Richard needs you to urgently prepare the complete dossier of housing projects from the last 2 years. The meeting is in 2 hours. The entire dossier? Yes. Contracts, budgets, timelines, progress reports. The investors want to see our experience in social projects before deciding on the partnership. Sarah felt her stomach churn. The dossier Beatrice was asking for contained exactly the evidence of the irregularities she had discovered. If the Japanese investors scrutinized those numbers closely, they would immediately notice the discrepancies. Beatrice, are you sure they want to see everything? Absolutely. Dr. Richard was very specific. He said, our transparency in social projects is an important competitive advantage. 2 hours later, Sarah was sitting in a conference room on the 30th floor that she had never seen before. It was an intimidatingly elegant environment, a mahogany table for 20 people, state-of-the-art projection screen, panoramic view of New York that left the entire city at the feet of those present. Around the table were Richard, Ms. Helen, 3 executives from the company, and 4 impeccably dressed Japanese investors who spoke English with a British accent. Sarah occupied a discreet chair in the corner of the room with a stack of folders organized chronologically. Her role was to provide documents when requested and take notes during the meeting, a seemingly simple task that had become extremely complex given the circumstances. Esteemed investors, Richard said in fluent English, our experience in housing projects of social interest represents not only corporate responsibility but also technical expertise in sustainable and efficient construction. Mr. Tanaka, the leader of the Japanese delegation, a man in his 50s with perfectly styled hair and thin-rimmed glasses, was meticulously flipping through the documents. Dr. Johnson, he said with impeccable pronunciation, these numbers are impressive. You managed to deliver housing projects of superior quality while maintaining competitive costs. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The Japanese were praising exactly the overpriced projects. Our philosophy has always been maximum efficiency with social responsibility, Ms. Helen responded, taking control of the presentation. Every dollar invested in our social projects generates returns both in quality of life for the communities and in technical learning for our team. Very impressive, commented another investor, studying a specific spreadsheet. This project in the East Side, for example, $900,000 for a daycare that serves 300 children. The cost per beneficiary is remarkably efficient. Sarah bit her lip hard. If the investor knew that the same daycare could have been built for $550,000, his opinion on efficiency would be very different. "Can I see the technical details of this specific project?" Mr. Tanaka asked. Ms. Helen gestured toward Sarah. "Our assistant has all the documents organized." Sarah stood up with her legs trembling slightly, grabbed the folder corresponding to the East Side project, and handed it to Mr. Tanaka. Her fingers brushed briefly against his during the transfer, and she realized her hands were cold. Mr. Tanaka opened the folder and began studying each document with the precision of an auditor. Sarah watched from her chair, her heart pounding so hard that she feared everyone could hear it. The Japanese investor was examining the cost spreadsheets, comparing suppliers, analyzing technical specifications. Suddenly, he slightly furrowed his brow. "Dr. Johnson," Mr. Tanaka said, "may I ask a question about these construction material suppliers?" Richard leaned forward. "Of course. Some of these prices seem, how to say, premium for a social housing project. For example, this specified ceramic flooring costs $400 per square meter. In Japan, we use similar materials in housing projects for about $100 per square meter." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could feel Miss Helen stiffening in her chair, while Richard maintained a neutral expression that she had learned to recognize as a sign of maximum alert. "Well, Ms. Helen said quickly, we must consider Brazilian technical specifications, logistics costs, the superior quality that our company always demands." Of course, Mr. Tanaka said politely. "But still, the difference is substantial. May I ask if you obtained comparative quotes from other suppliers?" Sarah felt as if she were watching a car crash in slow motion. It was exactly the question that could not be answered honestly without exposing the entire overpricing scheme. "Our purchasing team always follows strict quoting protocols," Ms. Helen said, but her voice had lost its previous confidence. "I understand," Mr. Tanaka said, and Sarah noticed that he was not convinced. "And who was responsible for approving these budgets?" "All approvals for social projects go through me," Ms. Helen said. "As the financial director, I have the autonomy to decide on suppliers and technical specifications." Sarah saw Richard cast a quick glance at his sister, and there was something in that look that she could not fully decipher. "Dr. Johnson," said another Japanese investor, "do you have other quotes for comparison? Our experience in similar projects suggests that there is significant potential for cost optimization." It was at that moment that Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stood up from her chair, grabbed a folder she had secretly prepared over the past few weeks, and walked to the main table. All eyes turned to her, including Ms. Helen's, who was staring at her with a look of surprise, quickly turning to alarm. "Mr. Richard," Sarah said firmly, "may I show the investors the alternative quotes I prepared?" The silence in the room was absolute. Richard watched her with an unreadable expression. Ms. Helen was pale, and the Japanese were waiting with polite curiosity. "What alternative quotes?" Ms. Helen asked, her voice sounding dangerously controlled. Sarah opened the folder and distributed copies of her spreadsheets across the table. "In the past few weeks, on my own initiative, I conducted market research to see if we could get better prices while maintaining the same quality. The results are interesting." Mr. Tanaka picked up the spreadsheet, and his eyes widened slightly. "These numbers are very different from the originals." "Yes, sir. For the same East Side project, I obtained quotes of $550,000 while maintaining all the original technical specifications." That represents a savings of $350,000, Sarah completed. Enough money to build another smaller daycare or renovate 2 schools or... Sarah! Ms. Helen's voice cut through the air like a blade. You did not have authorization to obtain independent quotes. Ms. Helen, Sarah said calmly, turning to face the woman who was watching her with barely concealed hatred. I thought the company would benefit from having more options. After all, the more efficient we are with resources, the more social projects we can carry out. Mr. Tanaka was looking from Sarah to Ms. Helen, clearly sensing the tension in the room. This is a very significant difference, he said diplomatically. Perhaps we can discuss these optimizations as part of our partnership. Richard finally spoke, his voice controlled but laden with meaning. I believe this discussion about cost optimization deserves a more detailed conversation among us internally before we proceed with the details of the partnership. I agree, Mr. Tanaka said, beginning to organize the documents. Perhaps we can reschedule for next week, after you have had the opportunity to review these numbers internally. When the Japanese investors left the room, the silence that remained was charged with electricity. Ms. Helen was watching Sarah with a look that could ignite paper, while Richard remained motionless at the head of the table. Sarah, Ms. Helen said in a dangerously low voice, you just sabotaged a $50 million deal. No, Sarah replied, firmly putting away her folders. I just showed how we can do more social projects with the same money. Get out, Ms. Helen said. Now. Oh dear, Sarah, Richard interjected. No, Richard, she has crossed all boundaries. Get out of my sight before I do something I might regret. Sarah looked at Richard, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She understood. Leave now. We'll talk later. When the door closed behind Sarah, she could hear the raised voices of Richard and Sarah through the thick glass. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone made it clear that the long-anticipated confrontation had finally arrived. Walking down the halls toward the elevator, Sarah knew she had just taken a definitive step. There was no turning back. The war was declared, and she was right in the middle of it. But for the first time in a long while, she felt completely at peace with her choices. The 48 hours following the disastrous meeting with the Japanese investors were the most tense in the recent history of Johnson & Sons construction. Sarah had spent the next day working normally, but she could feel the change in the company's atmosphere like a storm approaching. Employees whispered in the hallways, meetings were cancelled without explanation, and Sarah had not shown up in her office. Richard was also absent, according to Beth, who had reported tersely, Dr. Richard is in external meetings. I don't know when he'll return. It was Carla who brought the first concrete news on a Friday morning, arriving at the department with a worried expression and a strong coffee in hand. Sarah, do you know what's happening up there? Why do you ask? Because last night I saw independent auditors going up to the financial administration floor, and this morning, when I passed by HR, everything was sealed off. Sarah felt her stomach churn. Sealed off how? With tape, papers scattered around, as if they had turned everything upside down looking for something. Carla lowered her voice, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Sarah, do you know anything about this? Sarah Johnson. The receptionist's voice echoed through the floor's sound system. Please report immediately to the 30th floor. The silence that fell over the department was absolute. All eyes turned to Sarah, who stood up with her legs trembling slightly. During the walk to the elevator, she could feel the whispers starting behind her. On the 30th floor, Beth greeted her with an expression that mixed nervousness and something that could be admiration. Sarah, Dr. Richard is waiting for you in the executive meeting room. Please follow me. The executive meeting room was even more imposing than Richard's office. It occupied an entire corner of the building, with panoramic windows offering a 360-degree view of New York. But Sarah barely noticed the view. Her attention was completely focused on the people present. Richard was sitting at the head of an oval mahogany table with a grave expression she had never seen before. Beside him were two men in dark suits she didn't recognize, and an elegant woman with grey hair taking notes in a folder. "Sarah," Richard said as he stood up, "thank you for coming. Please have a seat." She took the indicated chair, trying to control her nerves. "Sarah," Richard continued, "I want to introduce Dr. Henry Smith, an independent auditor from Smith & Associates, and Ms. Patricia Williams, a corporate compliance attorney." The two professionals greeted Sarah with polite nods. "Sarah, Doctor," Smith said, "we understand that you have made some important discoveries related to the company's social project contracts." "Yes, sir. We would like you to tell us in detail how you came to these discoveries and what evidence you managed to gather." For the next hour, Sarah methodically recounted everything she had uncovered: the systematic overpricing, the suppliers with inflated prices, the pattern that repeated in all projects approved by Sarah. The auditors asked precise questions, requested specific documents, and checked every detail with the meticulousness of surgeons. "Sarah," Ms. Williams said when Sarah finished her presentation, "you understand that this information is extremely serious, that it could result in criminal charges." "I understand, ma'am." "And you still decided to reveal it?" "Yes. I couldn't pretend I didn't know." Richard, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "Sarah, I need to tell you what we discovered in the last 48 hours." She braced herself for what she knew would be a shocking revelation. "After Thursday's meeting, I confronted Sarah about the discrepancies you pointed out. Initially, she maintained the story about technical specifications and quality protocols, but when I mentioned that the Japanese were questioning the numbers—" Richard paused, as if the next words were physically difficult to pronounce. "She confessed." The silence in the room was absolute. Sarah admitted that for the past 2 years, she had been diverting funds from social projects through overpriced contracts with shell companies. The money was deposited into offshore accounts that she controlled. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "How much?" she managed to whisper. $4.5 million in the last 2 years, Dr. Smith said. "Money that should have been used to build 12 additional schools, 20 daycare centers, or 400 housing units." "My God," murmured Sarah. "There's more," Richard continued, his voice laden with a pain that went beyond financial betrayal. Sarah wasn't acting alone. She had a silent partner, our former accountant, who left the company 6 months ago claiming better opportunities. He is the one who created the shell company system. And now, Ms. Williams said, "We have enough evidence for a criminal case. Sarah is already with lawyers trying to negotiate a settlement. But the damage to the company's reputation could be irreversible," Richard finished. "The Japanese have cancelled negotiations. Other clients are questioning contracts. The press hasn't discovered it yet, but it's only a matter of time." Sarah processed all the information, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had taken on. "Mr. Richard," she finally said, "do you regret me discovering all this?" Richard looked at her for a long moment. "Sarah, 2 weeks ago He would have said yes, that it would be better not to know, to continue living in ignorance." He paused. "But now, seeing what my sister was capable of doing, seeing how many families were harmed, no, I don't regret it. You did the right thing. Even if it could destroy the company that Sarah was building was not one I wanted to run. I prefer to rebuild on honest foundations than to continue on a rotten foundation." Dr. Smith leaned forward. "Sarah, we need you to officially testify about your findings. Are you willing to do that?" "Yes, sir." "Do you understand that this could make you a target? That Sarah and her lawyers will try to discredit your testimony?" "I understand. And still, you are willing." Sarah thought of Ethan, of all the children who didn't have schools built, of all the families who didn't have homes because the money was being diverted. "Doctor," she said firmly, "if I don't do this, who will?" When the meeting ended and Sarah returned to the 22nd floor, she found the department in complete silence. Carla was waiting for her with an anxious expression. "Sarah, are you okay?" "Everything complicated," Sarah replied, "but necessary. Can you tell me what's happening?" "Not yet, but soon everyone will know." That night, Sarah returned home feeling as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Ethan immediately noticed that something was different. "Mom, you look, I don't know, like you've seen a ghost." It wasn't a ghost, Ethan. It was the truth. And sometimes the truth can be scarier than any ghost. But was it a good truth? Sarah hugged her son, feeling the comforting solidity of his small body against hers. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But it was the right truth." The following Monday, Sarah woke up to the phone ringing insistently. It was Carla, her voice trembling with anxiety. "Sarah, did you see the newspaper?" "Which newspaper?" "The New York Times. Front page. Scandal at the largest construction company in New York. CEO's sister diverted funds from social projects." Sarah felt her stomach drop. The story had leaked. "Sarah, did you know about this?" "Carla, you were the one who discovered it, weren't you?" Sarah closed her eyes, knowing her life would never be the same. "Yes," she said. "It was me." The silence on the other end of the line lasted several seconds. "Wow, Sarah. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I think I'm starting to understand." When Sarah arrived at the company that morning, she found a crowd of journalists at the entrance of the building, TV cameras, reporters with microphones. She managed to enter through the back, but knew it was only a matter of time before they discovered her identity. In the elevator, she encountered Richard. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. "How are you handling all of this?" he asked. "Day by day," Sarah replied. "And you?" "The same." He paused. "Sarah, I want you to know something. Regardless of what happens with the company, what the press says, what Sarah's lawyers try to do, you saved our integrity, and that is worth more than any contract." "Thank you, Mr. Richard." "And Sarah?" "Yes?" "From now on, you can just call me Richard. I think we've passed the point where formalities make sense." When the elevator doors opened on the 22nd floor, Sarah knew she was entering a new phase of her life. A phase where there would be no turning back, where every decision she had made had inexorably led her to that moment. And for the first time, it didn't scare her. In fact, it made her feel more alive than she had in years. 6 months had passed since the Johnson & Sons construction scandal exploded on the pages of New York newspapers. Sarah watched from the window of her new office, now on the 25th floor, with a partial view of Central Park, the city that had become the stage for the greatest transformation of her life. The autumn in March painted New York in golden hues that reflected off the glass buildings, creating a mosaic of light that seemed to symbolize new times. The company had weathered the storm, but was transformed. Sarah Johnson was under house arrest, awaiting trial after a plea deal that exposed a network of corruption that went beyond Johnson & Sons construction. The former accountant, Carlos Mendez, had fled to Paraguay, but authorities managed to block and recover $3 million of the $4.5 million diverted. Richard had made a decision that surprised the market. All recovered money would be allocated to a social repair fund, building exactly the projects that should have been carried out with the original resources. Sarah, promoted to Social Projects Coordinator, was personally overseeing each construction. "Sarah," Carla's voice interrupted her thoughts. "The representatives from the daycare center in the East Side just called. The construction was completed a week ahead of schedule, and they want to schedule the inauguration." "Perfect," Sarah said, turning from the window to face her desk, now filled with blueprints, transparent contracts, and photos of ongoing projects. "Schedule it for next Saturday. And Carla?" "Yes?" Confirm if Richard can be present. He insisted on attending all the inaugurations. Carla smiled. I've already confirmed. He said he wouldn't miss it for the world. The relationship between Sarah and Richard had evolved naturally and gradually. The months of crisis had created a partnership between them based on mutual trust and shared goals. The casual late-night conversations in the break room had turned into regular work meetings, then into lunches to discuss projects, and finally into dinners where they talked about both work and personal life. Ethan adored Richard, who had become a constant presence in their lives. Not as a father figure, the boy was too smart to accept that, but as an adult friend who treated him with respect and genuine interest. Richard had helped. Ethan had a science project on sustainable architecture, taking it to visit construction sites and explaining complex concepts in a way a child could understand. "Mom," Ethan had asked a few weeks earlier, "are you and Richard going to get married?" The question had caught Sarah completely off guard. "Why do you ask that, Ethan?" "Because you look at each other the same way Sophia's parents looked at each other before they got married, and because he always smiles differently when he talks about you." "And how would you feel if that happened?" Ethan had thought seriously about the question before answering. "I think it would be cool. He's a good person, and you seem happier when he's around. Besides, he promised to teach me how to drive when I turn 18. The phone rang, interrupting Sarah's memories. "Sarah," said Beth, "Richard would like to see you in his office when you have a moment." "Sure, I'm on my way." Richard's office had changed in recent months. The expensive artwork had been replaced with photos of ongoing social projects. The desk, once impeccably organized, was now covered with models of housing projects and prototypes of sustainable building materials. "How was the visit to the housing project in Queens?" he asked as Sarah entered. "Better than I expected. Families are moving in next week, and the infrastructure is working perfectly. Oh, and Ms. Mary, remember her, the lady who lost her home in the landslide last year?" she cried when she saw her new apartment. "She said she never imagined she would have a 2-bedroom home." Richard smiled, but Sarah noticed something different in his expression. A contained anxiety that she had learned to recognize. "Richard, is something wrong?" "Actually, yes. 2 things to be exact." He stood up and walked to the window. "The first is professional. We received a very interesting proposal from a Dutch NGO specializing in sustainable housing. They want to partner with us to develop a pilot project for self-sustaining affordable homes in New York." "That's fantastic. What's the timeline?" 18 months of development, starting in June. "But there's one catch. They want someone from our team to spend 6 months in the Netherlands learning their technologies and adapting them for the American context." Sarah felt her heart race. "And you're thinking of who?" "Of you, Sarah. They were impressed with your resume, especially your ability to understand the real needs of the communities we will serve." Wow, that's amazing, but what about Ethan and his school?" "That's exactly the question that brings me to the second topic," Richard said, returning to his desk and picking up an envelope. "Sarah, in recent months, our professional partnership has turned into something much more significant for me. You have become not just an exceptional colleague, but someone I can't imagine my life without." Sarah felt her cheeks warm, realizing where the conversation was leading. "Richard, let me finish, please. I know it's complicated because of work, the social difference, everything that happened with Helen, but I also know that what I feel for you is real, and that you feel something similar." She couldn't deny it because it was true. "Sarah Johnson," Richard said, kneeling beside the desk and taking her hand, "will you marry me?" The silence that followed was filled with emotions they had both held back for months. Sarah looked at the man kneeling in front of her, not the powerful CEO, but Richard, the man who had learned to value integrity over profit, who played video games with Ethan, who knew her deepest dreams and fears. "Richard," she said softly, "before I answer, I need to tell you something." "What?" If I say yes, it won't be because you can give me a more comfortable life, or because you can pay for Ethan's school, or because you can take me to the Netherlands. It will be because you have become my best version of a partner, someone who challenges me to be better, who respects my independence, who understands that I need to earn things on my own merit. And because Ethan has already said it would be cool to have you as a stepdad, as long as you keep your promise to teach him to drive when he turns 18. Richard laughed, his eyes shining with emotion. So? So yes, Sarah said, but with conditions. What conditions? First, I will go to the Netherlands as a professional from Johnson & Sons Construction, not as the CEO's fiancé. Second, Ethan and I will keep our apartment until we officially get married. Third, you help me finish my architecture degree, because I've realized that this is my true dream. I accept all the conditions, Richard said, placing a simple yet elegant ring on her finger. But can I add one? What? That our honeymoon be a trip to see housing projects in Europe. I want to combine romance with professional learning. Sarah laughed, realizing she had found not only love, but a true partner for the life she wanted to build. I accept, she said, sealing the agreement with a kiss that carried promises of a future built on solid foundations of respect, love, and shared purpose. When they told Ethan the news that night during dinner at the apartment that had become a second home for Richard, the boy asked just one question. Are you going to keep helping the people who need it? Always, they replied in unison. Then that's good. Can I keep having dessert? 6 months later, on a sunny September morning, Sarah walked down the church aisle wearing a simple yet elegant dress, holding the arm of Ethan, who was acting as the best man. The altar was decorated with simple flowers, and among the guests were families who had benefited from the company's social projects. Miss Mary, who had received a new home, was in the front row, with a smile that lit up the entire church. Richard was waiting for her, at the altar, wearing a suit that she had helped choose, with Ethan by her side holding the rings with the seriousness of an adult. When the priest asked if she accepted Richard as her husband, Sarah looked at the man who had become her partner in every sense of the word, then at Ethan, who was smiling proudly, and finally at the guests who represented all the lives they had managed to touch together. I do, she said, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had found not only love, but her place in the world. The kiss that sealed their union was applauded by a congregation celebrating not just a wedding, but the proof that dreams, when accompanied by hard work and integrity, can become reality. And as they left the church, hand in hand, with Ethan running ahead tossing flower petals, Sarah knew that her life had arrived exactly where it was meant to be, in a partnership based on true love, shared purpose, and the certainty that together they could make a real difference in the world. The storm that had almost destroyed their lives had, in the end, revealed the path to a brighter future than either of them had dared to dream.